Hey all, in this video I'm going to adapt this map into my style. As you can probably guess by the title, this is the Greyhawk setting in D&D. This particular map is actually of Eastern Flanaess, but like Greyhawk the city isn't even on this map, but the setting is typically called Greyhawk anyway. Just means everything is Greyhawk, but there's also a city called Greyhawk. Anyway, moving on, for those who stumbled upon this channel and aren't really sure what I'm talking about, here's a bit of a rundown. So Dungeons & Dragons has a bunch of settings, worlds, where you can dump your players into for adventures. A lot of the modules are either directly set in one of these places or are like loosely suggested to be in one of these places. If you've played a lot of 5th edition, like I have, you'll probably be familiar with Faerun and the Sword Coast especially. I have done a bunch of maps for Faerun. My personal obsession is with Cormyr and specifically the Twin Lands, but there are a lot of cool places that you can explore for a campaign. And so the other setting that's very common, very popular is Greyhawk. Now, as I said, Greyhawk is the name of a city, but because that is like the original base where your heroes got dumped into to start, that has like lent its name to the entire setting. And Greyhawk, the city, is on a continent which is called Flanaess. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. That's how I think it's pronounced. And a few people have requested that I make a map for Greyhawk, and that is why this now exists. So in this video, I'm going to talk a bit about my process, as well as add in some Greyhawk lore to fill in the time, and especially because as I've made this map, I've learned a lot more about the setting. As I said, I am primarily a 5th edition player, and a lot of the Greyhawk stuff was associated with like the earlier editions, was a lot more playable back then, but recently the latest D&D books have started referencing Greyhawk again. We got a new updated map, so that's really exciting. We might see a resurgence. Alright, so diving into my method. To begin with, I sketch out the basic shapes of the continent, and after that I go into way more detail and just trying to block everything where it should be. So I've referenced the official maps to get a better sense of where all the pieces belong. I do the coasts, I do the mountains, the rivers, and really try and get as accurate as I can to like the original maps. This step involves a lot of erasing. But bit by bit, I get the sketch looking like everything is aligned to where it needs to be. After that, I start the line art. I recently found some colored calligraphy pens that they don't run when I put watercolor over the top. So I've been using them on my maps and I think they look really cool. I think it gives the coastline especially like a bit more natural variation because it's got that thicker line, but there's also like some thinner moments, and it's like, you know, almost feels like waves in my opinion. So I'm really just love these pens that I found. Highly recommend. And since I'm starting as always with drawing out the coastlines of the map, I figured I might as well start with a body of water to dump some lore at you, and this body of water we're going to focus on is Nirdiv. Possibly that's how it's pronounced. I will put on the screen how it's written for your reference. It is a big lake. We only get half of it on this map. The other half connects to Greyhawk, the city. So it is a fairly important lake in terms of like going on adventures and stuff. So let's dive into it. Unlike the rest of the bodies of water on this map, This is a freshwater lake. It is also called the Lake of Unknown Depths, which is super interesting, and we will find out a little bit more about why it's called that in a little bit. But basically, it has a bunch of different navigable rivers flowing into it, and because of that, it's really, really busy. There are boats going everywhere, and all the cities around this lake are often quite wealthy because of the bustling trade. Now, there are also people who actually live on the lake directly, and they dwell on these large barges, and they are called the Rennie. We're going to call them the Rennie. Again, we're going to put how that's written on the screen. Correct me in the comments if I've got the pronunciation wrong. And these guys, they trade and fish and swim and spend most of their lives on the calm waters around these sort of shores, or the shallower waters near the coast of this lake. So they don't typically go deeper into the lake. In winter, they're typically on the southern shores, and they move around during the rest of the year. The reason why they're on the southern shores during the winter is because that is basically the nicest place to be during the winter. It is still fairly pleasant weather. Everywhere else is just a bit too chilly. So yeah. And these barges, they're actually fairly large, but not huge. So they usually fit about 15 to 20 people, and typically the captain, often called the lord of the barge, and his family or her family live in the boat's only cabin. Okay, they get a room which they share, and then everyone else, all the other sailors, could be extended family, could just be people who live on the boat. They spend their nights in the cramped corners below deck, wherever they can find a little spot. That's where they get to sleep. So it's not the nicest of lives, but it is pretty cool. It's interesting to potentially run into them, maybe even end up on one of these barges as an adventuring party. These guys the Rennie, are always very wary of pirates and deep water monsters. And because of this, they typically, because of the monsters, they typically stay close to the shore, because the deep water monsters obviously come from the deep water. Yes. As the lake's nickname suggests, the very heart of the lake is very, very, very deep. And a lot of people actually believe that the lake might be bottomless. In the middle, around the shores, there's plenty of shallow water, but not so much in the middle. And now, it's a very dangerous place to go, the middle of this lake near Div. But people do. Intrepid explorers journey into the open waters in search of the Isles of Woe. I don't know why you'd ever do that, but an adventuring party may just decide to go on this journey. And these are basically a series of islands said to hold ruins and unclaimed treasure of an ancient civilization. Now, no one has ever returned from these voyages, but the occasional artifact does wash ashore. And that has inspired quite a few people to believe that the islands are out there, and someone could find them if they were feeling adventurous. Moving on to another interesting region of the map, the Fallen Great Kingdom. Okay, so in the lore, there used to be this massive empire called the Great Kingdom, but due to a series of wars and government collapse, this Great Kingdom is less great. In fact, the region it controls is now a fraction of what its previous size was, so a lot smaller. In fact, the region it controls now is a fraction of the size that it used to be. The capital is still a place called Roxy's. That's Roxy's with an X. And it sits on the banks of the Flamy and Imeda rivers. I did end up drawing some farms around that area, but I think I should have put in more because in hindsight, this is supposed to be Metropolis. And I hadn't looked that up at the time. I just thought it was regular city. And then it's like, nope, this is like, at least was the biggest city on this side of the continent, basically, or at least one of them. So, it is what it is. Anyway, in the wake of this empire's collapse, other powers have emerged as key players on the global stage. One of them is the North Kingdom, which was originally the North Province, which you can probably guess by its name, marked the northern reaches of the Great Kingdom back in the day. And the North Kingdom has several interesting places under its rule, and one city that is very much not under its rule, but very interesting, and that is called Rinloru. Rinloru lies near the far east coast of the continent, and it's currently overrun by the undead. The guy currently in charge is called Delgleth, and he's a bad dude. He has turned thousands of the citizens of this city into undead servants, and the North Kingdom really would like him gone. Because their capital is honestly not that far away from Rinloru, and at any point, Delgleth could march his army of undead minions right up to the city to storm it. Now, the North Kingdom would probably win that fight, sure, but it's still a threat. And a really cool feature about the city of Rinloru is its castle, known as the Sand Castle. This thing was a giant tax evasion effort, and it still stands today. So basically, the castle couldn't be defined as a castle because it was built with magically reinforced sand. And the guy who built it did so sort of to avoid paying higher taxes, but really the construction was actually more expensive. But basically, the guy who built it is like, I just want to send a message by using this construction method to the royals in Roxy's, just like really show that I am not going to pay your taxes, even if it means spending more money on making my castle. Regardless, the Sandcastle is a fascinating site to visit and explore, and I think you'll be really able to capture your player's imagination with this location, not to mention have a lot of fun mowing down undead monsters. Going south of the Great Kingdom is an expansionist country called Alisa. These guys have been snatching up any land they can. They've swallowed up huge sections of the old Great Kingdom, so anyone bordering them better watch out. If you're looking for a bit more of a military border skirmish campaign, going anywhere around Alisa would be perfect. The country currently shares a border with 3 other nations. The first I've already mentioned, and that's what is currently the Great Kingdom, with its one city and a few principalities. And this place, basically the Great Kingdom is most of Alisa's northern border. And potentially Alisa's overking, Zavenda I, has his eye on the big prize that is Roxy's, the city I was talking about before. So moving to Elisa's south border, and that is with the kingdom of Sundi. Now, these guys are slightly more protected by virtue of their geography than the Great Kingdom is. Great Kingdom is very exposed to Elisa, and these guys are not. Now, as I was saying, the Sundi have a natural defense in the sense that to the north and west they have some mountains and very high hills, so it's a bit difficult to get through. Great places to put some castles and defensive positions. And then to their east they've got a sea, so pretty difficult to attack them from the sea. And then to the south they have a huge swamp right in the middle, and the main areas around the kingdom of Sundi is actually beautiful, lush, fertile land. So they're actually quite well positioned, other than the fact that there is basically no way in or out of the kingdom of Sundi, and pretty much their only actually land border is with Elisa. They are more or less surrounded by either sea or an expansionist country, so they're not necessarily in a great position, and they never really have been. So back when Sundi was a state of the Great Kingdom, they were known for their frequent rebellions. The people of Sundi are fiercely independent and will fight tooth and nail to keep themselves out of Elisa's grasp. And despite their fertile plains, they've actually always been generally a fairly poor country. As I said, there's really no major roads going into the realm, and the terrain that is so defensive does make it really hard to trade. Not to mention, that giant swamp is full of monsters who frequently raid the kingdom. So, yes, Sundi kind of got their act together, but, you know, it's a hard fight. And finally, we have Elisa's third neighbor. They border the kingdom of Nirod over the Heart River. So it's actually a very short border via land. It's a very large sea border. So there is a big bay. One side of it belongs to Elisa. The other side of it belongs to Nirond. And as you can imagine, both of these countries, the Kingdom of Nirond is also expansionist. They would really like to control the bay, and they are going to fight over it. Maybe not an all-out war just yet. As we've sort of mentioned, Elisa has plenty of other neighbors to worry about, and Nirond is the same. But they may just, go for some more subtler means of consolidating their power over Realmore Bay. And that is probably going to involve hiring some privateers to harass the enemy ships and make trade difficult for the other country. So perhaps an intrepid team of sailor adventurers can find plenty of work around this bay in the Sea of Gernat, and make quite a bit of money adventuring around, attacking some people as privateers, and maybe fighting some monsters as well along the way. So I've talked a lot about the lore of Greyhawk, and now I'm going to start explaining a little bit more about what I'm actually doing in the video itself. So just before, I had a lot of clips of me painting the ocean, that involves a lot of blue paint. As you can imagine, the ocean, it's blue. I just put the blue down. One thing I do to make it more interesting visually is I go along all of the coastlines with a darker pigment blue, and basically do a gradient out into the deep ocean. Now, realistically it should probably be in reverse, but I do find that the darker pigment around the coastline makes the continent pop. Once I've done all of that, I move on to the actual continent itself, the land. This involves a lot of different colors. I really like when there is a variety of colors in sections and they sort of merge into each other. And there's a free flow which I can get with watercolor, which is what I use. So I use a lot of yellows, ochres, browns, plenty of green, various different types of greens, and I try to give the whole area a lot of dimension. And this usually involves several layers. So I sort of start with the base layer and go through that, and then I usually come in again with more color in certain sections to really up the ante and make the colors pop. And sometimes as well, I'll have put down various greens and then I realize, oh, actually this could probably need to be a bit darker here and maybe a bit more yellow here to give it more flavor and visual interest on the map. Because otherwise, if you don't do any of that, it's just a great green blob basically. It's actually pretty boring because especially on this map there's a lot of space where like you can't see, there's like no rivers or anything because it only shows the major rivers. There isn't that many forests, which does make sense. This particular section of Flanaess is so populated. It's one of the reasons why later on I go through and put a lot of farms in. I did not film that, so you're just gonna have to trust me and put the farms in. And yeah, that is sort of what I am doing here in this painting. Now, I don't do the entire map in watercolor. So obviously the line art was with the liner pens, but I also, once all of the watercolor pieces are down, like all the paint is down, I do go through with some very like certain sections get alcohol markers just to make it a bit darker. So the primary spot for that is the mountains. I usually add a bit of shadow to the side of the mountain and a few other places such as the trees. I kind of find it hard to get the darkness that I want in trees, so I just go in with a pen. It's a lot faster and easier and makes them pop away from the general green scape of the painting. So once I have done all the alcohol markers, this particular case, as I mentioned, I put in farms. So I bought a bunch of just like water-based pens at some point, and they're just like a series of colors that are all fine liners, and so I have a lot of like greens and yellows and things, and so I go through and it's sort of like hatching in the sense that like I do a few little lines and I change directions with a new color, a few little lines, and I just place that around various population centers, so trying to represent this is farmland. I did this especially on this map, as I said, because there are sections of the map where it's just like there's nothing happening, it looks like. Once I've gone through and actually put in the labels, which I do digitally, the map looks a lot more filled up, but still I think the farmland really did pay off for this map to add that in. Don't always do that. As I said, sometimes the maps are really busy already and I don't need to add more visual interest, but if you're trying to do your own map and you're following along with some of these, that's my advice. If it looks like there's not a lot going on and you want to add new things, you can do farms. Another option is hills. Hills are always good. There's hills everywhere, so adding in farms and hills, great option. And you can do that like post doing everything else, whereas things like rivers are really hard to do in post. Actually, that's what it is, in post. Because the rivers, it's best if they actually flow out to the sea and there's not a harsh line where the river ends. I do try to avoid that where I can. Sometimes I just forget a river. It didn't happen this time, which I'm very glad for. But yeah, sometimes it doesn't work out. But it's okay. Most people are not going to notice. So I don't have much else to talk about in this video. I hope the lore and adventure ideas are helpful for you going forward. And in the meantime, I'm going to play a little bit of music and see you off at the end. For sticking around for the whole video. I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know your favorite bit of Greyhawk lore. I'm very excited to learn more about this setting, so if you're a big fan of Greyhawk, definitely leave it in the comments. If you enjoyed any of the advice or ideas that I presented in this video, also put it in the comments. I would love to hear from watchers. If you're even here, I don't get that many views, so it'd be amazing if you did get to the end to let me know, because as I said, I don't have like subscribers really, so yeah. See you in the next video. And if you do want a copy of this map, I do have prints available of this map, Greyhawk. It is going to be on my online shop, which is dndalley.com. And so yeah, you can just type in Greyhawk in the search bar and it will come up as for the Greyhawk map printable. And if you're watching this way in the future, I might have the other half of the main area of the continent of Flanaess done by then. Who knows? We'll see.